against Egan Holmes, case number 12 CR 1522. The record should reflect that Mr. Holmes is present with his attorneys and the prosecutors are present as well. During the lunch break, my staff was working on exhibits, and we noticed that attached to exhibit P-TR-799 was exhibit P-TR-800. 799 was admitted, 800 was not. So do you want to take a look at it, Mr. Orman? Ms. Curlings or Ms. Egel, would you show them the exhibit, or is it right there?
You know, they're all part of the same thing. This is just something removed from it. I would move to admit 800. I neglected to do that in error.
Okay. Is there any objection? You want to show it to Ms. Spengler so that she can see what you're looking at?
And if not, I can do it to another witness too, Your Honor.
All right, well, is there an objection?
Yes, Your Honor. There hasn't been sufficient foundation.
Okay, then let's remove it from the one that was admitted, and then you can attempt to admit it through another witness. So let's remove P-TR-800 because that has not been admitted. Thank you. I thought about the discussion that we had before the lunch break, and I've decided to allow Mr. Brockler to proceed as he has suggested for a couple of reasons. One is that this video is 22 hours long. It is going to take 4 days for the jury to watch that entire video. And so that's a long time of watching the same video. Part of my job as the judge presiding over this case is to make sure that both parties get a fair trial. And inherent in that is that the jury pay attention and that the jury concentrate on the evidence. And I think it's a lot to ask of jurors to pay attention to the same video over a period of 22 hours, which would take 4 days. We usually work about 6 hours a day when you exclude the lunch break and all the other breaks we take. And so 6 hours a day would mean that we would need 4 days or 24 hours for the jury to be able to watch the video. Secondly, I have tried to allow the parties to try the case as they see fit. I've tried to the best of my ability not to interfere because I think each party should be entitled to try its case the way it sees fit. So by way of example, I allowed the defense to use 2 attorneys during opening statements, to have 2 attorneys make opening statements. I've never done that before, but I thought in this case that made sense. Given the magnitude of the case, given the type of case it is, and given the length of the trial, I felt that it made sense to allow 2 different attorneys to make opening statements. In other words, to divide the opening statements into 2 parts like that. I had never done that before, and I did it in this case. I don't know that I've ever allowed what Mr. Brockler is asking the court to allow. I may have, I just don't have a memory whether I have or not. It is true that Dr. Reed's testimony will be different than the testimony of other witnesses who have been allowed to comment about, for example, a surveillance video or some other type of video. But he's going to be commenting on his interview of the defendant. I mean, that's why I asked him to do a sanity examination. That's why he was ordered to do a sanity examination, so that he could then rely on that examination as well as on other evidence and form opinions about the defendant's sanity. So he is going to be talking about that examination and the defendant's answers. Now, he can't speculate. For example, he could not say, well, when the defendant gave that particular answer, he meant X, Y, Z. That would be improper. But he can be asked questions about why he conducted the examination the way he did, why he asked certain questions, why certain questions were important, what significance certain answers had for him, what opinions he formed based on certain answers. Those are questions that he is going to be asked by both sides. And he's going to be asked those questions whether I allow the video to play all at once or whether I allow the prosecution to play it in segments. Mr. Brockler is right that this videotaped examination was broken down into different sessions because it's so long. And I think it lasted multiple days, and within each day there were multiple sessions. There was a morning session, and then there was an afternoon session. And then, although most of the sessions took place at Colorado Mental Health Institute at Pueblo, there was at least a follow-up session that took place later, days later, at the jail. And so it's truncated that way already as well. And so I don't see anything wrong with the prosecution proceeding in the way that it is proposing. Mr. King indicated that he may have to replay some parts of the video. And I had anticipated that already, but that's going to be the case whether the videotape plays all at once or whether it is played in segments. And so that's not going to be affected one way or another. And again, I don't see any prejudice to the defense. I don't see this as giving the prosecution an unfair advantage or any advantage for that matter. It's just a way of presenting the same evidence. And I think that they are entitled to present it however they think it is most effective. So I will allow it. And so Mr. Brockler can play a part of the videotape, then ask some questions, then move on to the next part of the videotape, ask some questions, and go on from there. But he cannot repeat, obviously, the same questions or have the doctor repeat the testimony. To the extent that anything is repetitive, I'm sure Mr. King will object, and then I will rule on any objections that are made contemporaneous with the objections being advanced. All right, anything that we need to talk about at this time before we bring the jury in? On behalf of the people? On behalf of the defense?
Judge, just for clarification, if I'm hearing the court correctly, the court is also denying my request to cross-examine each segment one by one.
I am. I think the prosecution is entitled to do the direct examination of Dr. Reed all at once. And once the prosecution is done with direct, then you'll get a chance to cross-examine, and you can replay parts of the video and ask questions, and you can do it the same way they're doing it if you wish. So that if you want to play a certain part of the video and ask some questions, and then replay another part of the video and ask some questions, I'll let you do the same thing. But they're entitled to do the direct examination without interruption, and then you'll be entitled to do your cross-examination without interruption as well. All right, let's bring the jury in, please. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch. The prosecution may call its next witness at this time, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Chelsea Corser Jensen, please. Finally.
Good afternoon. Could I have you raise your right hand for me, please? Now you just swear an oath. You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please be seated. Could you please tell us your full name for the record, and please spell your first, middle, and last names?
Chelsea Elise Corser Jensen, first name Chelsa, middle name Elice, last name Corser, space Jensen.
Mr. Brockler, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ma'am, would you please tell us what you do for a living?
I am a graduate student in the neuroscience PhD program at the University of Colorado.
How long have you been doing that?
I'm just finishing my 4th year now.
How much time do you have left before you get your PhD?
Hopefully another 6 months or so.
Oh, awesome.
Probably graduating in the fall.
Now, you started the program back with the defendant seated over here in the, I think it's a blue-greenish shirt with glasses, beard, and a mustache. Is that right?
Correct.
So what I want to talk to you about is how you first came to meet the defendant, and then we're going to take you up through your year with him, okay?
Okay.
When did you first meet the defendant?
I first met him in the winter, spring of 2011, when the program flew us both out for the interview weekend, for recruitment weekend.
And for that interview weekend, how many of you were there?
I don't remember, maybe 12 to 15 or so.
And did you get a chance to have some one-on-one time with the defendant, or was it in a group setting?
No, it was in a group setting. The first day you have 8 interviews with different professors, and there are a lot of scheduled activities and campus tours and things like that, so there's not very much time for the recruits to interact with one another.
Did you make any initial observations of the defendant at that first meeting?
He seemed pretty relaxed, pretty quiet.
Is that weird, the relaxed part?
For the most part, yes. A lot of people are pretty nervous if it's their first time, especially interviewing for a PhD program, and if it's their top choice, they are pretty nervous for interviews, and he seemed pretty relaxed and pretty laid back.
You saw how he was dressed. Was it unusual in any way?
No, professional.
When's the next time that you saw the defendant?
I think the next time was the orientation day for our program, so August or September of 2011.
Did you know before August of 2011 that both you and he had been accepted into the neuroscience program?
Yes.
How?
During the summer, we received a number of emails with a lot of logistical things in terms of getting state residency for people or important dates for classes and books and things like that. And the 6 of us in the same class were included on those emails, so we knew then who was going to be in our class.
Now, we've heard that the defendant started early, like June. Did you also start early?
I did. I started in July.
Different lab?
Yes.
Prior to this orientation you described for August, did you have any other contact, either in person or by email or text with the defendant?
No, our labs that we were in were on different floors, and with it being the summer, there weren't too many scheduled activities or social events put on by the department or the program.
Talk to us about August then, that orientation. What kind of contact did you then have with the defendant?
So the orientation day is a series of talks from environmental health and safety people and animal research people, and the 6 of us kind of found each other and met up, and we exchanged cell phone numbers and got each other's email addresses, and the 6 of us ate lunch together that day.
Did you make any other additional observations of the defendant?
No, he was still pretty relaxed, pretty calm.
Quiet?
Yes.
Anything about it that stuck out in your mind as being extreme one way or the other?
No.
Tell us about the contacts then that you had with the defendant from that orientation moving forward through 2012.
So we were in, I think, all the same classes together, so
You know what, now that you said that, it makes me want to back up a minute. Forgive me for cutting you off. Could we get Defense Exhibit 8, ma'am? Thank you so much. Take a look at this on your screen, ma'am, and tell me, does this look to you like it accurately captures the academic year from about August of 2011 through June of 2012?
yes.
Do you see the classes that you took that year?
Yes.
And are they the classes that the defendant took as well?
Yes.
Now, you didn't have those lab rotations that are up there north of that kind of midline there.
Right. It was the same time frame, but different labs. the same time frame for the lab rotations, but not the same labs.
And do me a small favor, just a little bit closer on that microphone. Yeah, thank you so much. So when we look at the stuff to the bottom half of Defense Exhibit 8, and we look at the core classes, did you take all those?
Yes.
And did you have the defendant in those classes with you?
Yes.
Describe how many students take those classes.
So those classes are all of the first-year students from all of the biomedical science PhD program. So there's maybe 100 to 150 students, and it's in a big auditorium.
There's a class down there marked Cellular and Molecular Neurobiology. Did you take that class?
Yes.
And did you take it with the defendant?
Yes.
Tell us about how big that class was.
It was the 6 of us in the first-year class, and then I think 2 or 3 others that maybe took it as an elective, or the MD PhD students that take it once they begin their PhD portion.
You threw out some letters there that don't mean anything to me. MD,
So there are some students that get an MD and a PhD as an 8-year program. So they do 2 years of med school and then their PhD and then return for their last 2 years of med school. So they're a little off schedule, but they have to take the same, if they decide on the neuroscience PhD program, they have to take the same classes that we take.
Because one doctor isn't enough.
Right.
Okay. So there's 2 other classes that are here as we work our way through 2011 and 2012. One is called Fundamentals of Neurobiology. Was that an elective also?
No.
What, is that one you had to take?
Yes.
Did you take it with the defendant?
Yes.
And then there's one called Developmental Neurobiology. Also a mandated course?
Yes.
Also taken with the defendant?
Yes.
There are 2 other things below those. Do you see them?
Yes.
Are those mandated or electives?
Mandated for the neuroscience PhD students. Yes.
Did you have grant writing with the defendant?
Yes.
Did you have biological bases of psychiatric, neurological, the rest of it?
Yes, and that's an elective course.
Okay, and you had that with the defendant also?
Yes.
And it looks like you were about to blow that up for me. Thank you in advance. I should ask you to do that. Thank you. Disorders was the word I couldn't see. Thank you. And then also, and we'll talk about this at the end, you also took your preliminary oral exam on the same day as the defendant.
Correct.
Okay, so you had an opportunity to be with him throughout this academic setting for really the entire year,
Yes.
other than labs.
Correct.
All right, tell us your observations of him in these classes.
He didn't take notes, rarely took notes, which was one of the things that I noticed pretty early on. And he was very relaxed. He usually kept his arms crossed and kind of looked out the window during class.
Now, the phrase forced nonchalance, did you come up with that before?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I used that in my interview with the FBI to describe his behavior in class. It seemed like he was sort of going out of his way to look relaxed and would make sort of an exaggerated crossing of his arms and would yawn several times, and it seemed kind of forced in a way. And would lean back in his chair and look very relaxed in class.
In those small group classes that you described having there in that mid-group, and ma'am, I'm sorry, you can take that down. Thank you so much. Thank you. You said he didn't really seem to take notes. Were there books for these classes?
No.
Did the other students in the classes seem to take a lot of notes?
It kind of varied. So we had a textbook that was a reference material for the class, but the professor that would be lecturing on any given day would they would lecture with a PowerPoint presentation and would usually email their slides ahead of time. So some students would just print off those slides and take notes in the margin or would take notes on the page. Others would have a notebook and actually take notes.
Did you ever see the defendant with that?
I don't really remember exactly if he had the materials or not, but rarely saw him write anything down.
Did anyone take more notes than you?
Probably.
Okay. In some of the class settings, well, in all the class settings, did you see the defendant seemingly paying attention to the professor who was lecturing? Tell us about that.
So he usually sat in the same place. So the small classes were just in a conference room size, because there were never usually more than 10 people, and he usually sat on the side of the table that was facing the window outside, and usually would just kind of look out the window rather than really being attentive to what the professor was saying and paying attention to the slides and the presentation.
Now, because of that, did you have the sense that he wasn't paying attention?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Why don't you rephrase the question?
I'll just cut to the chase. As you see him staring outside, not taking notes, was he ever called upon in class and asked to participate?
Yes.
First off, did he ever volunteer to participate?
No.
When he was called upon by the professors, did he have the right answers?
Yes.
Okay. And that was true throughout all those classes you talked to us about?
Yes.
Did you see him do his end of the rotation talks that we've heard a lot about?
Yes. All of our talks were back-to-back on the same day.
So he would see yours, you would see his?
Correct.
All right, give us your assessment of how those rotational talks went.
I would sort of describe his presentations as not very professional.
Why not?
Based on, he usually wore jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, whereas the others of us would dress nicely. And he would usually stand up at the podium with one of his hands in his pocket, kind of slouched over. And the slides kind of seemed put together kind of at the last minute, maybe not as organized as they could have been.
Now, did you see a distinction in your mind between how the women PhD candidates dressed and the male PhD candidates dressed?
The females tended to dress nicer than the males.
So was it that unusual for a guy to be there in jeans and a button-down shirt?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. In terms of the presentations themselves, you saw all three that he did?
Yes.
Did they seem remarkably different to you from the first one through the third one?
No.
The third one wasn't particularly great or bad?
No.
Were they all about the same quality?
I would say so, yes.
How did they compare to the other students' presentations now? And I'm not talking apparel, but I mean in terms of the content and the presentation.
I think they were probably about the same.
Did he seem to you to have, was he comfortable up there talking?
No, seemed kind of awkward and uncomfortable.
Tell me about any type of humor that you saw him try to inject into some of these presentations.
I think it was his second rotation talk. Part of his project, he worked with a protein that has the acronym ATM, and in spelling out what that actually stood for, which is a really long name, he then said, and you can take that to the bank.
Why isn't that funny?
It is funny, but wasn't really perceived as very professional for a talk.
Okay.
Because the talks are to the whole program. So all of the faculty and students, I mean, anybody on campus can come and watch them, and that's kind of their assessment of the first-year students.
Let me ask you about the grant writing proposal class. Did you have the opportunity to, I guess, review his written work?
I did.
How did that happen?
So the grant writing class is designed to prepare students to be able to write their own fellowship for the National Institutes of Health. They have a program, the National Institutes of Health, NIH. They have a grant that they award PhD students, and so this class is designed for the students to get practice in writing those proposals and formatting all the different sections and things to look out for. So we were just asked to write a proposal on whatever topic that we wanted. It didn't have to pertain to a lab that we rotated in or anything. But part of the process, and this is the same way that it happens in the government when you submit a grant, is that there's a primary reviewer that reads the grant, and then there's a secondary reviewer. And I was assigned as the primary reviewer of his grant. And so on the day of it's called the mock study section, which is how they do it at the NIH, where everybody is in a room together. And then the primary reviewer explains to everybody in the room what score they gave the grant and why, and justification for that. And then whoever's a secondary reviewer has also read it pretty thoroughly, and they either come back and say, yes, I agree with this, or I don't agree with that part of it, and then as a group you come up with a score together.
Now, do all of the students that are taking this mock grant writing class do that for each other?
Yes.
And in this particular case, there were some other parameters of the grant that become important when you talk about your evaluation of the defendants.
Yes.
What were they?
So the rubric that we were given to score the grant had sections for innovation, approach, and significance. And I think there were probably some guidelines for what number that you would assign based on certain parameters. And so you're supposed to write the grant to be a project that you could complete in 1 to 2 years as a PhD student. And so the approach has to be experiments that are feasible for a student to carry out in that time frame and with whatever resources that you would theoretically have in a lab. Innovation, you have to propose something new that's not been done before and that's interesting. And then significance usually has to be something that pertains to health or neuroscience and progressing the field.
Now, in this particular case, you assigned the defendant a score.
Yes.
And did you score him high, score him low?
My score was low.
Now, was that because of the writing? Because of the
No.
writing?
No.
What was it because of?
Based on sort of those 3 sections. The grant was written well, but I gave it generally low scores for those sections because the experiments that he was proposing in that didn't seem feasible within those 2 years. It wasn't clear to me in evaluating that how what he was proposing would be different or better than methods that are already out there. And there wasn't a very clear description of how this would really impact neuroscience and human health and how it related to disease.
So it's not that it was gibberish.
Right.
It just didn't meet the parameters you thought you'd been given.
Correct.
How did that score that you gave to the defendant for his mock proposal compare to the other scores that you saw being given throughout?
Generally, for his grant proposal or
Yes, ma'am.
other people's, my score was lower than how the other readers scored it, and as a group, we kind of decided on one that was in the middle somewhere.
And how did that score compare to the other scores that the other students in that section got?
It was about the same as the other students.
You had the opportunity to see the defendant on June the 7th of 2012 for those preliminary oral exams.
Correct.
How did that happen?
So there were 2 different groups of professors that were evaluating us for the preliminary exam, and we were assigned to one group or another, and they did one group was evaluating a student and the other one was evaluating them at the same time, and I was in sort of the second wave of people to be evaluated, and I was walking down the hall to the room for my exam, and he was in the room nearest the elevators finishing his exam, so I saw him at the whiteboard writing some stuff as part of his exam.
Was he dressed any differently than you'd seen him dress in general for those other rotational talks?
No.
And did he seem like he was, I guess, talking to the professors?
Yes.
Did you detect anything different about him in that setting than you'd seen from any other presentation he'd given?
No.
I forgot to ask you about this one thing, and that is, go back to that third elective class that you had, the something bases for many big words.
Biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders.
That's right. Now, you saw him, that's freaky, but yes, thank you. You saw him in there with people you thought were his friends.
Correct.
All right. Did you watch his interactions with them versus when he was in class without his friends?
Yes. In that class, he usually showed up to the class with his 2 friends, and they sat together across the table from me, and they would be talking amongst themselves before the professor started.
What were their names?
Gargi Dada and Benjamin Garcia.
And did you make some observations about what they would talk about?
They talked
Subject
about
matter?
Calls for hearsay.
Ms. Ruckler?
Well, Your Honor, I'm not offering it for the truth of the matter asserted, just the subject matter about the gist of the conversation.
Would counsel approach, please? Mr. Brockler, you may proceed as indicated at the bench conference.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you a smarter question, okay? And that question is, what did you hear the defendant saying to those two people that you identified as his friends in the class?
I know that they would talk about plans for going out to dinner or plans for hanging out.
Did they talk about video games?
Yes.
And did you make any observations about the cell phone covers that the individual you identified as Ben Garcia and the defendant had?
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes. James and Ben both had the same cell phone case. It looked like an old Game Boy, made it look like an old Game Boy from the back.
And it looked like they had the same case?
Yes.
Now let me ask you something about Ben Garcia. Did you ever see him change the color of his hair?
Objection,
Yes.
Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled?
Go ahead, ma'am.
Yes.
What color did you see him change it to?
His hair was dyed red or orange.
Did it look like the color that you ultimately saw that the defendant had after this incident occurred?
Yes.
I want to ask you two final questions. Over the course of the time that you had been exposed to the defendant, from roughly February the 11th with a break until August, and from then until June the 7th, 2011. By the way, did you see him after June the 7th, 2011?
No.
Okay. Over that period of time, did you ever perceive that the defendant was detached from reality?
Let me
Objection,
stop
Your
you.
Honor.
Let me stop you for just a moment. You said June 7, 2011. Did
Oh.
you mean 2012?
I did, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, what's the objection? Why don't you ask the question anew, and then you can object to that.
I recall what it was. I was going to say, objection under speculation. We also think it's improper lay opinion testimony.
All right, ask a new question, and if there's an objection, Ms. Hicks, please make it. Go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. I screwed up the dates. So from approximately August of 2011 until June 7th of 2012, did you ever perceive the defendant to be detached from reality, in your opinion?
Objection, speculation, 702, lay opinion, improper lay opinion.
Overruled?
Go ahead, ma'am.
No.
Over that same period of time that we've discussed, really even from the first time that you saw him in February of 2011, did you ever detect any difference in the defendant?
No.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
That's not annoying. Sorry. I forgot to ask you about Ben coloring his hair. Do you remember about when that was in the school year?
It was during, I made the observation during our biological basis of psychiatric and neurological, the biological basis of psychiatric and neurological disorders course. So that would be between March and May, roughly, of 2012.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Hicks, cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Corser. Is it Miss Corser Jensen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I don't have very many questions for you. And I'm going to talk about just a couple of topics. The first one I want to talk about is sort of the nature of your interactions with Mr. Holmes, okay? And when you first met Mr. Holmes, how did he introduce himself? As James Holmes?
I don't remember.
But you knew him as James Holmes during the time that he was in your program with you, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, isn't it correct that initially you, sort of as a group, would invite Mr. Holmes out to do things with you and your friends, or you and the other people in the program, is that right?
Yes. We, at least after our first rotation talk, we made a plan to go to the bar across the street to celebrate being done, and just said, we're going to go get a drink if you'd like to join, but that was kind of the extent of it.
And he didn't really ever join you guys with those outings, is that right?
Correct.
And, eventually you didn't really invite him, Mr. Holmes, to go with you anymore because he never came with you, is that right?
Correct.
So you never had any social interaction with Mr. Holmes during the school year of 2011 into 2012?
Just in class.
Right. And you never had any conversations with Mr. Holmes about his life, his interests, anything like that, correct?
He would usually be one of the first ones in class, and if I got there early, I'd just ask how his rotation was going or if he had a good holiday or things like that.
A lot of things really related to school, scheduling, things like that.
Usually.
Okay. And he never initiated that communication, it was always you, is that right?
Correct.
You talked about his three lab presentations that he did, is that correct?
Yes.
And I think that you felt they were awkward, is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. He also did a presentation on the biological basis of neurological and psychiatric disorders.
Yes.
You also felt that that presentation was a bit awkward, is that right?
Yes.
And he also sort of just abruptly stopped that presentation when time was up and walked away, is that right?
Correct.
And you thought that was a little odd?
Correct.
Okay. And that presentation would have been given in the spring of 2012, is that right?
Yes.
Sometime around May, is that right?
Probably yes.
Okay. It was also strange to you that he picked a topic in that presentation that had nothing to do with any sort of disorder, is that right?
Yes.
You talked about the second rotation presentation with regard to the joke about the ATM, right?
Yes.
Nobody laughed at that when he gave that joke during that presentation, is that right?
Not loudly, at least.
It was kind of uncomfortable for people in the room, is that right?
Yes.
Because that's not really appropriate for those types of presentations, correct?
Correct.
You didn't put any jokes like that in your presentation, correct?
Correct.
And you really don't know why Mr. Holmes put those types of jokes in his presentations, correct?
Correct. It's not uncommon for professors in their presentations to put in jokes or puns or whatever, but for a first-year student, this is usually the first time professors will have seen you, and so it's important to make a good impression, and it's not appropriate at that time point.
Right. And you have no idea why it was that Mr. Holmes felt the need to put those into his presentations, correct?
Correct.
All right. You've also described that Mr. Holmes was quiet,
Yes.
reserved,
Correct.
wasn't one to initiate communication,
Correct.
wasn't one to raise his hand or ask questions in class, correct?
Correct.
And you've interpreted that in a variety of different ways. I think you said laid back is how you saw it.
Yes.
Okay. Fair to say, though, you don't really know why Mr. Holmes presented as being quiet and reserved, correct?
Correct.
And you don't know why he presented in class sort of staring off out the window, correct?
Correct.
You've also said that he was awkward, especially in his presentations.
Correct.
And you don't know why he was awkward in his presentations, is that right?
Correct.
In all the time that you saw Mr. Holmes, isn't it correct that you never saw him mean to anybody?
Correct.
You would not describe him as angry, correct?
Correct.
You would not describe him as aggressive, is that right?
Correct.
And you would not describe him as somebody who was an attention seeker, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Corso-Jensen. I don't have any other questions for you.
Mr. Brockler, do you have any redirect?
I do, Your Honor, briefly, if I could.
Yes.
Ma'am, that sense of humor stuff you talked about in the presentations, I get that. Was part of the awkwardness because there's a disconnect between the defendant's presentation in life, like in class, and the sense of humor he tried to inject into his presentations?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
Overruled.
Go ahead.
Yes. And even in the presentations, his delivery would be very monotone the whole time, and even the delivery of the joke was monotone.
Is that how he presented throughout the time you were exposed to him, kind of monotone?
Yes.
The presentation subject matter that you were asked about, that Ms. Higgs asked that it didn't have a disorder on it, was that the class taught by Professor Tregellis?
Yes.
In that class, did you have to let Professor Tregellis know what the subject matter of your presentation was going to be before you gave it?
Yes.
And he had to approve on that?
Correct.
So he would have approved the defendants?
Correct.
Can I have a moment, Your Honor?
Yes?
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Ms. Higgs, do you have any recross?
Yes, Your Honor. I just want to clarify with you, Ms. Corser-Jensen, that when you said that the defendant presented as monotone, this was throughout classes as well as his presentations, correct?
Correct.
And when you talk about monotone, you mean really sort of very flat in affect. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
All right, the jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness. May this witness be released from our subpoena, Mr. Bruckler?
Yes, Your Honor, she may. Thank you.
All right, is there any objection, Ms. Higgs?
No, Your Honor, there is not.
All right, thank you. Call your next witness, please.
Tony Villapando.
Good afternoon. You solemnly swear or affirm under penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, please be seated.
Your Honor, may we approach briefly?
Yes.
I'm not going to get into anything. Lawyers solve something by themselves for once, Your Honor.
We have an agreement, Your Honor.
That's a first. Go ahead.
Did she already state and spell her name, Your Honor?
Not yet. Could you please tell us your full name for the record, and would you please spell your first, middle, and last names?
Yes, Tony Rochelle Villapando, Toni, Rochelle, Rachelle, Villapando, Billapando.
All right, Ms. Tisch-McGuire, you may proceed.
Thank you. Were you at the Century 16 movie theater on July 19th of 2012 in Aurora, Colorado?
Yes,
Did that go into the early morning hours of July 20th of 2012?
yes.
Could you please tell the jury a little bit about what you remember from the day of July 19th prior to going to the movies that day?
Earlier that day, I was working at Red Robin, the morning shift, and my husband at the time, Bryson Villapando, was moving into our new house. I remember being at work and my friend Alex Sullivan came in and we got really, really hyped up about the movie and celebrating his birthday. Later, I attended a meeting with my ex-husband and I and Farah Soudani, and then we left there and went to the movie theater later that evening.
Do you recall approximately what time you got to the movies that night?
I want to say around like 10 or 10:30.
What did you do while you were waiting for the movie to begin?
We were just people watching and goofing off and eating candy and just chit-chatting, work gossip, most likely.
Do you recall what theater number you were in?
I know that we ended up moving from theater 8 because we had a bigger group add on with us. So we ended up moving into theater 9.
Do you recall where you were seated in theater 9?
Yes, I was seated on the left-hand side, right in the middle of stadium seating, so about row 12, and I was the third seat in.
And that's if you're facing the movie theater screen?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember anything happening while you waited for the movie to begin?
Nope, just us goofing off.
Please tell the jury about what happened in the movie that night.
the movie started, and I saw a door open on the bottom right, and I saw the light shine in, and I saw a black figure walk in and throw something across the room with a hissing sound. It sounded like it landed a few rows in front of me, and I heard the tink from the canister land on the concrete. I then kind of was like, what's that? I asked Bryson, he was sitting next to me, what it was, and I got no response from him. I don't know what he was doing. Then I saw people get up, and I heard a loud pop. At that point, I said, fuck this, and I realized that my tooth flew out of my face, and I realized I was hit. As I stood up and said that, my husband tackled me to the ground, and then I heard continuous gunshots.
What do you remember thinking when you were down on the ground?
I laid there on the cold concrete trying to breathe because of the gas that was released. And I laid there and prayed for it to stop and for everybody to be okay. And I was terrified I would never see my 3-year-old girl again.
Objection to 403.
Sustained.
I'd ask to strike.
Members of the jury, you'll remember the instruction I gave you at the beginning of the trial. When I sustain an objection, it means that the question was not appropriate, and you should disregard any partial answer or any full answer given in response to the question. I am going to strike just the last part of that answer. The rest of the answer was okay, but the last part is stricken, just the last sentence, okay? All right. Ask your next question, please.
What do you recall hearing while you were down on the ground?
I heard continuous gunshots and loud, extremely loud noises from that, and just people screaming for help or just screaming in pain.
Were you able to see at all what was happening with any of your friends who you were at the theater with that night?
No, I didn't try and get up.
What do you recall happening after that?
I remember gunshots paused for a second, and I thought, I need to get out of here. So I tried to get up and was then again tackled by Bryson back to the ground, and then heard a second batch of gunshots firing. Finally, they stopped, and Bryson yelled, "Run." And I stood up and tried to run, but ended up slipping in the pile of blood. I tried to go up the stairs to the upstairs exit, but there were so many people running down that I ended up getting pushed with the crowd to go down the stairs.
Your Honor, if I may approach the witnesses, what's been marked as People's Exhibit 1111.
Yes.
Ms. Belpondo, do you recognize this diagram?
Yes, I do.
Does that diagram fairly and accurately represent what you recall from the night of July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I would move for the admission of People's Exhibit 1111.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Without objection, it is admitted and it may be published.
I could please have 1111. All right, Ms. Belpondo, I think that there is a mouse up there. I don't know if you can, I know your hand's broken.
Yeah.
If you're, with your other hand, you can use it at all. Okay, great. It's maybe a little sensitive. If you could show for the jury on your diagram where you were seated in the theater that night.
Yeah. I was seated.
And if you could move that microphone, sorry, let me help you since you're broken
Please.
hands.
Okay, does that work? I was seated in row 12, the third seat in, if you're facing the screen.
Right, and who's seated next to you?
My ex-husband, Bryson Villapando.
All right, and then there's another person there that you noted. Who was that person?
Yes, the M stood for Maria Carbonell.
Okay. And then on your diagram, can you show the jury where it was that you saw that canister go across the theater?
Mm-hmm. It started over by this emergency exit right here when I saw someone walk in and threw it over to this left side, this area.
All right, and were you able to get a good view of the person who walked in the door that night?
No.
Now, I'm trying to see if there's any. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much. Your Honor, if I may approach the witness with what's been marked as People's Exhibit 4519.
Yes.
What happened after you left the theater?
I remember running out through the exit with Bryson and straight to the parking lot. And I turned around to see if anyone was following us, and I saw Maria and her 2 children. And I thought the rest of our group would be following. But that's all I saw. And I saw another girl in the parking lot who had been...
An objection to testimony that occurred, or to information that it happened outside of the theater.
Sustained.
Sorry. Were you eventually transported for medical treatment?
Yes, Bryson and I both then got in our car, and he drove me to Aurora Medical South ER.
What happened when you got to Aurora Medical Center?
I realized I was the first victim that showed up, and told the doctors what had happened and that I need to be seen for injuries that I wasn't even aware of. I knew about my face, but...
Please tell the jury about what the injuries were that you sustained that night.
It was a shotgun wound to my upper right lip.
Did it go through more than just your lip?
Yes, it broke my tooth in half, one of my right front teeth.
Did you have to have any dental surgeries as a result of that?
Yes, actually, it blew the bottom portion out of my tooth, so the nerve was
So
exposed.
hearsay.
Overruled. It goes to the injuries that she's aware of.
You can tell the jury about the surgeries you had for your teeth.
So since the nerve was exposed, they tried to fix it with a crown. Later decided that it wasn't working and had to extract my tooth and have to get an implant put in.
Now, do you recognize the photograph that I placed in front of you that's numbered 4519?
Yes.
Was that taken the night of July 20th, or the morning of July 20th of 2012?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time I have moved for the admission of People's Exhibit 4519.
Any objection?
No objection.
All right, without objection, it is admitted. And it is 4519, correct?
Yes, thank you, Your
All
Honor.
right, it is admitted and may be published.
If I could please have 4519. All right, if you could zoom into the lip area for me, please. Does that picture fairly and accurately represent where you received your gunshot wound that night?
Yes.
No further questions for this witness. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, is there any cross-examination, Ms. Spengler?
No.
All right, and the jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness. May she be released from her subpoena?
Please. Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
All right, thank you. Call your next witness, please.
David Bloom.
Yes. If I could have you raise your right hand for me, please. Do you solemnly swear or affirm in a penalty of law that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
All right, please be seated. You can hand me those exhibits. Thank you. Could you please tell us your full name for the record, and please spell your first, middle, and last names?
David Seth Bloom, David Sethbloom.
Mr. Edson, you may proceed.
What is your occupation?
I'm general counsel of a company called Various Incorporated.
Are you familiar with an online dating website called adultfriendfinder.com?
Yes, we operate it.
Are you associated or employed in some fashion with them?
Yes, I'm general counsel of Various Inc. We operate the website, and we're a subsidiary of Friend Finder Networks.
Are you also a custodian of records for adultfriendfinder.com?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness, please?
You may.
Sir, I've handed you what's been previously marked as People's Exhibit 380. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What is that?
This appears to be documents that we produced for the police.
Have you just quickly flip through that document? First question is, have you seen those documents before you came in here to testify today?
Yes.
Do those documents associate with a particular user?
Yes, this appears to be the records we captured for a user of the website named with a user ID or what we call handle Classic Jimbo.
Further within those records, is there an actual person's name and address associated with these records?
Yes, there's a credit card billing information, and let me find it. It's on the last page, James Holmes.
Are you familiar with Adult Friend Finder's record-keeping system?
Yes.
Are the records for Adult Friend Finder computerized or digitized records?
Yes.
Are the computer entries that are used and contained, like within People's Exhibit 380, made in the regular course of Adult Friend Finder's business?
Yes.
The participants in making the record, are they acting in the routine and ordinary and normal course of business for Adult Friend Finder in making those types of records?
Yes.
The input procedures to make those types of records, are they accurate?
Yes.
The entries that are made and used to create records, just like which are contained within People's Exhibit 380, are they made within a reasonable time after the transaction?
It should be contemporaneous.
What do you mean by that?
At the same time, sorry.
The information that is contained within People's 380 transmitted by a reliable person with knowledge such as yourself?
Yes.
The information that's contained within People's Exhibit 380, again, on these computerized and digitized records, are they kept and maintained within the ordinary and normal course of Adult Friend Finder's business practice?
Yes.
The records that you have before you, are they regularly received, maintained, and relied upon just as other records for Adult Friend Finder?
Yes.
Subject to court's previous rulings, Judge, I would move for admission at this time of People's Exhibit 380.
Is there any objection?
Yes, there is, if we may approach.
Yes. Folks, I need a moment so you can continue talking. I just didn't want that loud sound to continue. But if you're going to talk, just do it quietly because now everybody can hear you. All right, would council please approach? All right, folks, thank you for your patience. Here you go, sir. The hearsay objection is sustained. The rest of the objection is overruled. Mr. Edson, you may proceed.
Thank you. Sir, are you familiar with the business workings of Adult Friend Finder?
Yes,
Are you familiar with the business relationship that Adult Friend Finder has with its users or its customers?
generally speaking, yes.
Fair to say that Adult Friend Finder is a website that individuals or customers have to pay in order to access or use?
So they have to pay to use certain features, yes.
Okay. Do the records reflect in this case that payment was made related to People's Exhibit 380?
Yes, we provided billing information.
Okay. Did that in fact create a business relationship between this user, James Holmes, and Adult Friend Finder?
Yes,
In looking at People's Exhibit 380 as these computerized records, does Adult Friend Finder regularly receive, maintain, and rely on these types of records in their normal and ordinary course of business?
yes,
When Adult Friend Finder relies on these types of records, do they also rely substantially upon the information that is inputted by the user or the customer?
yes,
Is all that information contained within the records of Adult Friend Finder?
yes.
Move for admission under 8036, Your Honor.
Any additional objection, Ms. Higgs?
Your Honor, we still think that foundation is lacking with regard to at least one statement in particular.
All right, why don't you approach, please? All right, Mr. Edson, you may proceed. The objection is sustained.
Sir, do you have People's Exhibit 380 in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to direct your attention to a couple of specific pages here. If you could go to the fourth page at the top, it's got a listing of dumping user data. Do you see that?
Yes.
Below that, it's got some personal data file information.
Yes.
You also previously referenced in your testimony about a customer user profile and information. Do you recall that?
Vaguely. I don't remember the specific question.
Okay, well, do you recall at the back of People's Exhibit 380 information relating to the particular customer's name
Yes.
and that user profile information?
Yes.
That user profile information, the personal data file, all of that information that is information that is inputted by the customer or the user. Is that fair to say?
On the page 4,
Yes.
some of it is.
Okay. The information that is the information that's not inputted by the customer, where does that come from then?
That probably just comes from our computer, our database.
That comes from Adult Friend Finder?
Yes.
Okay, so the information that does not come from Adult Friend Finder that's contained within the user profile and the personal data file, is that information substantially relied upon by Adult Friend Finder in establishing a business relationship or a business record associated with People's Exhibit 380 between themselves and the end user?
Yes.
The other customer information that's contained throughout People's Exhibit 380, and I'll give you an opportunity just to fully review People's Exhibit 380, all of the user information, the customer information, all the communications that are placed in there by the user, not by Adult Friend Finder, but by the user.
Yes.
All of that information, is it substantially relied upon by Adult Friend Finder in creating the account, in creating the records, in creating the business relationship between the two parties?
Yes.
I would again, Judge, move for admission under 8036.
Any additional objection, Ms. Higgs?
Yes.
All right.
Would like me to approach?
Yes, please. All right, the objection is sustained. Mr. Edson, you may proceed.
Sir, in People's Exhibit 380, the user information, the profile, the customer information, and the communications, including any headline information that is placed in there by customers. Do you see all that information?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Do you need any more time to refer to any of that?
I don't think so.
All of that information, is it substantially relied upon by Adult Friend Finder for a business purpose in creating the business relationship between Adult Friend Finder and its customers?
I believe it is.
Explain.
Thank you. There's a lot of data in here. Some of it we use for fraud protection, some of it we use for billing information, part of it we use to make our site more attractive to other people. Part of it is to build a database, part of it is for location finding. So we have purposes for using all that information.
Is that information used within your business for those particular purposes?
Yes.
Move for admission under 8036, Judge.
Now, is there any additional objection?
Yes, Your Honor, I would persist in my objection with regard to the specific statement.
I'm not sure I'm following you. Why don't you approach, please? Okay, the objection is overruled. The exhibit is admitted. That's P-TR-380.
Permission to publish, Your Honor?
And yes, and it is admitted under the business records exception to the hearsay rule 8036. You may publish it.
We could go directly to that statement. Let's please publish .380, the sixth page, please. Sir, do you have the People's Exhibit 380, the sixth page in front of you?
Yes, the one on my screen is barely readable, but I'm looking at it.
Do you have the actual exhibit in
Yes,
front
I
of
have
you as
the
well?
actual exhibit.
Okay, let's look at that statement. The second full paragraph there, in the middle, it says title. Do you see where I'm referring to?
Yes.
What does that statement say?
Will you visit me in prison?
It says title. What does title mean?
That's generally the top of the user profile would have some sort of invitation to another member, and that's what the title would be. So
If we could go to the seventh page, People's Exhibit 380, please. See where it says credit history?
yes,
Down a few spots, it has a CC and a number with some X's through it. Do you see that?
yes,
Is that a credit card number?
redacted, yes.
Okay, what are the last four digits?
2217.
The name and information below that, who does that refer to?
James Holmes, you want the address written?
Yes, please.
Read, 1690 Paris Street, number 10, Aurora, Colorado, United States, 80010.
If we could go to the fifth page of People's Exhibit 380, please. Scrolling down here a bit to the lower section. You see an email address there?
Yes,
What's that email address?
classicjimbo@gmail.com.
What is the IP address associated with this?
67.166.38.7.
And what is the date registered?
Is it on this page?
It's just a bit
Yes, I see it
below-
now. Sorry about that. July 5th, 2012, at, looks like a little around 1 o'clock in the morning.
What exactly does that refer to?
That's when in this particular case, Classic Jimbo registered the account.
Judge, one moment, please.
Yes.
Contained within People's Exhibit 380 were there also photographs?
Yes,
What did those photographs refer to? What are they part of as far as the records go?
they are apparently the pictures that were posted on this profile for the benefit of other people to see.
Could I please have the first page of People's Exhibit 380? Could I please have the second page of People's Exhibit 380? Could I please have the third page of People's Exhibit 380? Could I please have the fourth page of People's Exhibit 380? Moving down to the last portion there where it says login history on the fourth page of People's Exhibit 380. Do you see that?
Yes,
Direct your attention to July 18th of 2012. Do you see that?
yes,
Is that the last login from Aurora, Colorado?
it appears to be,
Why do you say that?
because I'm looking at the next ones and they're from Las Vegas.
What does that mean?
They were geolocated, and we have a geolocating service, and everything on this list was Aurora, Colorado, except for the last two.
Okay, so in other words, when would the last login for Adult Friend Finder be?
According to this, it would be July 18th at 7:34,
Of what year?
2012, sorry.
Can I have one moment, please?
You may.
If we could go to the 6th page of People's Exhibit 380. I see at the top there it says July 24th, 2012 for a date and a login. Do you know what that's referring to?
That's the last login on the account in the account history.
Okay. Was there any sort of refund associated with this account?
Yes, I think we issued a full refund on the card.
Okay, would that associate with that particular date?
It could.
Okay.
I'd have to sort of put the records together to come to that conclusion, but that
Okay.
sounds reasonable.
If we could just scroll down a bit more, please. Under cart details, I'm going to direct your attention to that particular subsection. Can you look at that and talk to me about any sort of refund, please?
We refunded the account
On what date?
on the 24th at 9:50 in the morning, it looks like.
Okay, would that be July 24th, 2012?
By 24th, 2012, I apologize.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Nothing further, Judge, thank you.
All right, cross-examination, Ms. Higgs?
Thank you, yes. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I just have basically hopefully one question.
It's never
Every time
one.
I say that, it
Yeah.
never ends up being just one. With regard to when items were posted on this page,
Yes,
your records cannot tell you those particular dates of when items would be posted. Is that right?
not these records, no.
Okay. And I just want to also, not just one question, sorry.
I didn't expect one.
I want to clarify for the jury that the first date that this account was created was July 5th of 2012, is that right?
According to this, yes.
And this was an account that you all closed before that period of time that the customer had paid for, right?
I wish I understood the question.
Yes. It was initially opened for a period of 30 days, is that right?
Yeah, okay, now I understand your question. It was a 1-month subscription that would have expired in August of
Right.
2012.
And you all closed it prior to that?
We closed it on July 24th, 2012.
Okay. I think that's it. That's all I have, thank you.
Any redirect, Mr. Edson?
No, thank you.
And the jury does not appear to have any questions for this witness. May this witness be released from his subpoena?
Yes, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No, Your Honor, there is not.
All right, sir, thank you.
Who gets this?
I'll get it, thank you.
Thanks.
Here you go, George. Members of the jury, because we're going to have a longer afternoon than usual today, we're going to take 2 breaks instead of 1. So let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. Instead of a 20-minute break, we'll take 2 15-minute breaks, okay? Let's have a 15-minute break. Please make sure you abide by all my advisements during the break. Thank you. Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. I admitted P-TR-380 a moment ago, and I overruled the hearsay objection under the business records exception 8036. There was an objection specific to the statement that was read by the witness, And the statement was, "Will you visit me in prison?" That statement is also admitted on an alternative ground, and that is under People versus Glover. I find that the testimony and the exhibit established that the account in question belonged to the defendant and that the defendant authored the message. So it's allowed, or it's introduced for that alternative, or on that alternative ground as well, as an admission by a party opponent, because I find that the prosecution has proven by a preponderance of the evidence both that this was the defendant's account and that it was the defendant who authored the message. And that's based on all the identifying information and the IP address in the exhibit. All right, is there anything we need to talk about at this time on behalf of the prosecution?
I'll just direct the court's attention that our next witness will be from another website that is also related to D99 and D107, the court's rulings.
Okay. Anything else at this time on behalf of the defense?
Your Honor, I do have a very short record that I'd like to make, but I'd like to make it out of respect at the bench.
Okay. Do you want to make it right now, or do you want to make it after the break?
If we could do it right now, thank
Sure.
you.
All right. Folks will be on break. Thank you. The court will be in recess.